The paper we'll be talking about is titled, Will the EU AI Regulation Give Rise to Another Brussels Effect? Lessons from the GDPR. I am Agnidipto Tarafder, a professor of law at the OP Jindal Global University. And with me is my co-author, Mr. Aniruddh Vadlamani, who is a final year student at the same institution. To introduce the topic, we're looking at a contrast in this paper between the EU GDPR and the role it has played in global data governance in terms of becoming a blueprint for the rest of the world, including large MNCs to follow. The EU's proactive role in data governance has been talked about quite widely, especially since it's become the touchstone, the standard which a number of data legislations across the world have been following, including previous drafts of the Indian Data Protection Bill. The EU has also recently, last year, come up with its AI guideline. And the purpose behind this paper is to look at whether that AI guideline has the same potential to try and become the blueprint for AI regulations across the world to proliferate. In this context, we're looking at a number of factors. The paper is divided into 4 different parts. And each of these 4 parts talk about various things that we're trying to touch upon in order to get to the conclusion as to whether the AI regulation in the EU can become the new GDPR. First we look at the GDPR's outsized impact in the sphere of data regulation and how it has influenced policies across the world. In the second part, we look at the contrasting regulatory approaches of the EU and the US, one being the largest regulator and enforcer of digital rights, the other being the technology hub of the world. Finally, we look at whether the AI regulation can become what the GDPR has for data, and whether it can effectively become a blueprint for other nations, in particular, the case of India. In the next part of the paper, in the first part of the paper, what we talk about is the GDPR's outsized impact on data regulations across the world. So, since the GDPR provides a very comprehensive, minute data regulation, it actually ends up becoming the blueprint for a number of laws to come. This is, of course, due to a number of factors. The first of which is the fact that the GDPR wasn't the first in its domain. It was preceded by a regulation called the DPD, or the Data Protection Directive, which held the field for about a decade before the GDPR was brought in a staggered, systematic manner. The second is, of course, the size of the European market. The European market is so large that any player in any market actor wishing to enter the European market must accept its regulations and comply by them, which has enabled the GDPR to have this kind of an impact because of the voluntary compliance of a number of countries, number of market forces which have wanted to enter the EU market. The sharp contrast that exists between the US and the EU models of regulation is the next thing that we talk about. And this is interesting because these are two of the market giants that we have today in the world, in the West especially. And despite taking part in the market activities of both players, what's created a rift is the fact that the EU has become the preeminent regulator in the market, whereas the US has been essentially the party which creates the maximum amount of technology. The growth of Silicon Valley has been attributed to the fact that the US has carried on a process of permissionless innovation. Through the 90s and the early 2000s, when technology was in its developing stages, digitalization was growing rapidly, the US attempted to not regulate the market at all in order to ensure that this ecosystem of innovation is continued in its jurisdiction. The EU, on the other hand, has taken a completely opposite perspective, where it came up with preemptive harm-based classifications, which focused on the individual's rights, such as privacy and others, to enable the fact that the EU becomes a market leader, at least in the regulatory sector. These two contradictory viewpoints have created a rift of sorts, where the EU has been seen as a party which is imposing its rules on others, whereas the US is seen as a compliant party so far, but has run into a lot of trouble. US-based tech companies have run into a lot of trouble in the EU trying to do business. In the recent past, however, we're seeing a merging of these two approaches to the extent that the European Commission's press release that came out last year talks about a more open data sharing, and in order to enable the EU to take advantage of the second innovation wave, as being called, so as to not fall too far behind the tech giants of the US, Silicon Valley. However, the US, on the other hand, is talking about a federal privacy regulation of an umbrella nature instead of the sectoral regulation that it has been practicing so far, in a way to almost in line with the GDPR and in tune with the rest of the world. To talk about the next part of the paper, I will invite my co-author, Mr. Aniruddh Vadlamani.
So moving on, I'll be delving into the possibility of the AI regulations becoming what the GDPR is for data. So this part of the next few slides, I will be analyzing the impact of the AI Act on the global platform by introducing the AI Act first, then talking about its key takeaways, and finally evaluating the Brussels effect of the AI. So the EU AI Act, also known as the Harmonized Rules on Artificial Intelligence, was proposed by the EC on 21st April 2021. This is a very comprehensive proposal, which is a byproduct of many legislations and acts of the US, EU, and China, the three big players in today's market. Going on, this regulatory proposal is not made in isolation, but has rather taken much of its literature from binding and non-binding texts. For instance, the product liability context, which is a substantial portion of the Act, has been crystallized from the EC strategy on digital market, single market. Moreover, the fundamental rights context in the Act has been taken from the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights, and the AI related data governance and data protection literature has the trappings of similar provisions in the GDPR. The Act consists of 12 titles, which fall under 7 broad categories. Now, moving on, I'll be talking about the strengths and the weaknesses of the AI Act. To start off by a particular strength that we have analyzed, which is the AI Act's risk-based approach. The principal difference between the GDPR and the AI Act is that the task of conducting risk assessment is in GDPR is with the data controller, which usually implies subjectivity and risk assess subjectivity and bias. However, within the AIA, the standardized nature of risk assessment allows only the legislature coupled with the EC to carry out the risk assessment for the AI system. The minimal leeway granted to the providers brings about a reliability factor in assessing questionable AI system. The second the second strength of the AI Act is its differentiation of 4 standards, and it is based on a pyramid of criticality. So the bottom of the pyramid is the minimal risk AIs, then above them are the limited risk AIs. The middle of the pyramid is the high risk AIs, and the tip of the pyramid is are the unacceptable risks. Now, the second crucial strength of the AI Act is its standardized database. So Article 60 provides for a central standalone database for registration of high-risk AIs. The Act creates an obligation on the provider and its representatives to get themselves and their high-risk AI system registered with the EU database. The principal benefit of a standalone database is that it calls for a self-assessment based mechanism whereby the onus of registering the high risk AI is on the providers and its representatives. And non-compliance can lead to action against such providers. Therefore, by proposing a centralized database, the Act has introduced an interesting innovation which would not only serve as a deterring mechanism for questionable AIs, but also develop trustworthiness among the peers in the system. However, we have also analyzed certain drawbacks of the AI Act. So the first one is the scope of the AI definition. This is the main drawback because AIA has given out a future-proof definition. The overtly broad definition of AI seems to be problematic because of the ever-evolving AI technology and also because it invites over-regulation. For instance, McCarthy in 1956 defined AI as a science of engineering and making intelligent machines. But soon after, Kurzweil, 30 years later, brought about a radical change in the definition of AI, stating that AI is not only the art of creating an intelligent machine, but also performing certain functions that only human intelligence could perform. This showcases that AI cannot be restricted to a particular context, nor can it be generalized, however broad the definition may be. The one-size-fits-all approach that has been adopted by the EC is certainly not a viable approach because being a scientific discipline, AI technology embodies a precise techniques and structures that need to be looked through a more holistic lens. Now, moving forward, I'll be analyzing the Brussels effect of AI. To assess the Brussels effect of EU's AIA, we need to base our analysis on two main questions. Firstly, what will be AIA's de facto impact? That is, companies' voluntary compliance with the AIA in non-EU jurisdiction on global AI systems, and to what extent will the AIA's influence internationally will influence international AI regulatory regimes? That is the de jure impact. So many authors around the world have contended that apart from AIA's slight global impact on AI regulations, its effect would be de facto limited. However, we feel that de jure impact of AIA has already begun. The de jure effect would follow from the de facto channel itself, or another way could be from the blueprint adoption channel. The de jure effect can be witnessed essentially due to the company's non-performance in the non-EU market because of the stringent laws that all these other countries would have. And it has voluntarily bounded itself to those stringent regulation. And therefore, it becomes fundamental for these MNCs to lobby similar and less stringent rule in their home countries. And the other blueprint model would be that some countries like the EU, like the US or India, let's say, would adopt similar regulations in the future. However, all that said, comparing the impact of GDPR with the potential impact of AI is no easy task. A cursory glance at the EU AI reveals substantial differences between regulating data and AI system. The GDPR, while such an innovative regulation, is a codified consolidated act which has sort of borrowed norms from the 1974 US Privacy Act to the OSED guidelines in 1980. These norms were developed, debated, and arrived at over for years now. Whereas AI does not have any regulation, the AI Act that has been proposed by the EU is the first standalone AI regulation. There has been no other sort of proposal, legislations from any other countries whatsoever. And therefore, we need to be patient and sort of let the ship sail and then analyze the Brussels effect of AI in the future. Now I'll pass on the stage to my co-author, Mr. Agnidipto.
Does India need an AI regulation? The short answer is no. Currently, India does not have an AI regulation, and just as we have seen with regards to data protection and other Information Technology Act, we have been slightly behind the curve when it comes to regulating technology and emerging technologies. With the AI Act also, the potential AI Act for India would also be slightly ahead of the curve, considering the fact that right now, most of the development in AI is in its nascency, and we don't know what shape or form it is going to take in the future. To come up with a regulation at this point in time would actually be a case of over-regulating and ensure that the Digital India initiatives and all the other startup initiatives that we're taking could be thwarted at its nascency and could lead to the opposite of the intended effect, that is to shrink India's market. So considering that, perhaps at this stage, sectoral regulations would be the better way to go. And that is essentially what we've been arguing in this paper.